Goeiemôre, Every Nation Parel. Wat 'n voorreg om vanoggend saam met julle te wees. Baie dankie dat julle saam met ons ingeskakel het. Ons sien uit daarna om vanoggend hierdie tyd saam met jou te spandeer en glo dat jy vanoggend regtig 'n ontmoeting sal hê met God, met sy woord en met sy gees. En ons hoop dat jy bemoedig is daar waar jy is vanoggend. Soos julle weet, ouer gewoonte is ons lief daarvoor om saam te celebrate as geestelike familie. So ons dink ook aan almal wat in hierdie tyd dalk verjaar het of spesiale geleentheid gevier het. Ons bid God se seën oor julle lewens en ons mis dit regtig om in lewende lywe saam met julle bymekaar te kan wees, sodat ons jou sommer vir jou kan bid en sommer vir jou high five kan gee vir dit wat jy celebrate. Maar weet dat jy nie alleen is in hierdie tyd nie en ons as span is so gereed om met julle te ontmoet. So wanneer ook al jy nodig het vir koffie of om sommer net met iemand bymekaar te kom, gelukkig is dit nog wettig om in 'n koffiewinkel bymekaar te kan kom en ons glo tog dat disippelskap is verhouding, so ons wil julle daaraan herinner, selfs in hierdie tyd waar ons nie by mekaar kan wees nie. Kom ons kom by mekaar uit in verhoudings. Ek het vanoggend 2 afkondigings wat ek baie graag met julle wil deel. En die eerste een is ons vas en gebedsweek. Ons het elke jaar aan die begin van die jaar 'n tyd waar ons vas en bid en sommer net die Here vertrou vir die jaar wat voor ons lê. En veral in 2021 met hierdie unieke omstandighede rondom ons, dink ons dis 'n goeie idee om aan die begin van die jaar 'n bietjie tyd uit te vat en net die Here te vertrou vir 2021 en vir dit wat hy in ons lewens wil doen. So ons wil julle as geestelike familie uitnooi om saam met ons te vas. Van die 1 Februarie tot die 6 Februarie. Daar is materiaal beskikbaar vir elke dag. Daai materiaal kan jy kry op die Church Suite app of jy is welkom op jou Play Store of op iOS as jy op iPhone is. Die app, die Every Nation app te gaan aflaai en elke dag se dagstukkie sal daar vir jou beskikbaar wees. Dan het ons ook gebedsessies tydens vas en gebed van maandag tot donderdag aand, van 7:00 tot 7:30 wil ons net vir so 'n halfuur by mekaar kom, sommer 'n lekker groot Zoom meeting by mekaar stel en ons wil sommer net lekker saam kan bid. Jy sal al die inligting rondom dit op ons sosiale media platforms kry of op die kerk se WhatsApp groep. Maar ons sien uit daarna om die jaar reg af te skop met 'n lekker vas en 'n lekker tyd van saam bid en God se aangesig soek. Die tweede afkondiging wat ek moet maak is Vision Night. Alhoewel dinge hierdie jaar 'n bietjie anders lyk, besef ons dat die kerk bestaan vir 'n doel en die kerk bestaan vir 'n rede en daarom is ons opgewonde om julle uit te nooi na die kerk se visie aand toe. Ons het hierdie jaar vir Pastor Roger Pees saam met ons vir ons visie aand en dit sal wees op die 7de Februarie van 7 tot 8 en die inligting sal volg wat jy nodig het, waar jy moet wees, wanneer jy daar moet wees en al dit wat jy nog mag nodig hê. Saam met dit het ons ook vanoggend 'n bietjie hartseer nuus om te deel en soms wil ons sommer net ons harte oopmaak vir ons familie wat vriende en geliefdes afgestaan het aan die dood in hierdie week. Ons dink spesifiek aan die Kirstens en aan die Dreyers wat 'n moeilike week agter die rug het met die afsterwe van oom JD Kirsten en dan ook Wian se pa oom Dreyer wat afgesterf het. Ons dink aan julle en ons dra hierdie las saam met julle en ons wil sommer vanoggend net 'n oomblik neem om saam met julle te bid. Vader, ons dankie dat ons sommer vanoggend net in die teenwoordigheid kan staan. En Heilige Gees, dankie dat een van die rolle wat U in ons lewens speel, is om ons trooster te wees. Here, en ons dankie dat ons vanoggend as geestelike familie ons arms rondom boeties en sissies kan sit wat deur moeilike tye gaan, wat deur swaar tye gaan. Saam met dit, dank ons Here dat ons weet dat U Gees is die een wat vertroos. En dankie Here dat ons weet dat dit is juis in die tye wat ons harte gebroken is, dit is juis in die tye wat ons rou, wat U naby aan ons is. En ons dankie dat U die een is wat daai genesing bring. In Jesus naam. Amen. Amen. Nou vanoggend is ons baie bevoorreg om 'n internasionale gasspreker saam met ons te hê. Ons het vir Pastor Rice Brooks en ons is opgewonde vir die boodskap wat hy vanoggend met ons wil deel. Ons hoop julle geniet dit saam met ons.
Welcome, and again, I'm honored to be able to give the message in the first Sunday of the year, and to have this theme of a family focused on God, and I believe that not only as we as a church family, but you as a family, that's your heart's desire. You wake up on New Year's Day and you think, okay, all the things we want to do right, all the things we want to restart, we're certainly doing that as a country, saying how can we restart, how can we get things better, how can we do things better, physically, how can we do things better, in every area, especially spiritually. And I go back to the basics whenever there gets any kind of disorienting anything going on that's disorienting around me, I kind of center back into the simplicity of what's important. Go to the basics. I love talking about the existence of God to college students because there's nothing more foundational than there is a God. And because God exists, then everything else flows from that truth. God exists, therefore that there's a purpose in the universe, which we'll talk about in a moment. The gospel is true, as Pastor James just led us through communion. The gospel is public truth. It's something that happened in history. Christ was a real figure. He really did live. He really did die. And 3 days later, his tomb was empty. And because of that, Christianity started in the very place where it would have been easiest to disprove, in Jerusalem 3 days after his death. And the disciples who would have known whether he was alive or not, whether he was really, whether this was some kind of a hoax or whether they were doing this for some other motive. Many people die for what they believe to be true, but no one dies for what they know to be false. And most of the disciples, I would say 7 out of 12, history says, gave their lives as martyrs rather than deny that Jesus had not been raised from the dead. So our faith is sure. We're not here on the first Sunday of 2021 and just having wishful thinking or just thinking, let's try this religious thing again. It really is true. And so because of that, as we open this Sunday, and we're talking about a family focused on God, the question that's raised is, well, what should we focus on? What do we focus on if we're to be a family focused on God? And so I want to say 3 things that I think will be easy to remember. That as a family, we're to focus on God's purposes. Number 2, we're going to focus on his promises. And number 3, we're to focus on his people. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your mercy today. We thank you that this is our Bible. Lord, this Bible is true. We believe that it contains knowledge of you. Not religious knowledge, but real knowledge. And that as we open your word today, that we are able to make contact with you. Not just what we imagine to be true or what we hope to be true, but what is really true. And that anchor of confidence that we have, that the scriptures are true, that the gospel is true, then we can make sense in the midst of all the noises around us. We can make sense of the world because we know what's true. We have a North Star. We have a compass that does not lead us astray, but it is giving us an objective reality to guide us out of confusion. And Lord, though voices of confusion may grow in the coming days, may we not be a people distracted into all the voices of rancor and division and speculation and conspiracy theories. Lord, may our voices, may our minds and hearts be focused on your voice and your truth. In Jesus' name, amen. The book of Genesis, in fact, this was a passage that Pastor James and I were talking about as we discussed this series, Awesome God. And so many times we all overuse. We overuse amazing. Everything's amazing. Everything's awesome. It's like, are there any other words? And when we say a latte is amazing, or when we say a football game is amazing, it really diminishes what we're really trying to say when it comes to what does it mean that God's amazing or God's awesome. If everything's awesome, then it's like underlining everything in a book. If you underline with your marker everything, then nothing's underlined. So we really have to kind of rethink what does it mean to be awesome. What does it mean to be in absolute awe? Not just surprised or we just don't know what else to say. But we do have an awesome God. The universe, some estimates are 96 billion light years across. I mean, we can't fathom. It's beyond imagination, the vastness of the universe, and how that we are this little speck in the universe. And yet, are we just as the materialist, as the scientist, the atheist would say, we're just insignificant? I was at a conference years ago, and one of the leading atheists got up in front of all these atheists, and I think I was the only Christian in the audience at the Global Atheist Convention. But he said, "I'm here to tell you that you're more insignificant than anything you've ever imagined." He said, "We constitute about 1% of a bit of pollution in the universe." And I'm thinking to myself, you're not going to be asked to do the motivational speech before the Super Bowl with that kind of talk. We're more than just an incidental byproduct, a little piece of dirt. In the vastness of the universe, this ability to be conscious, this ability to be aware, this ability to study the universe, this is all a part of this awesome God who has endowed us with this faculty of knowledge and understanding and wisdom, and the ability to look at the universe as a problem to be solved, as it can yield answers to us. As we see diseases or problems, we can put our minds and focus on understanding what it is and how to get a breakthrough. That's what it means to walk by faith. It isn't just to hope that an answer falls out of the sky. Faith begins with the belief that there can be confidence that there's an answer to see disease ended and to see problems solved. And that's the kind of faith we want you to have in this awesome God. But I want to just talk about these three things about this family focused on God. And what are we to focus on? Number one, we're going to focus on God's purposes. One of the verses we all use when all else fails, when everything else fails, we go back to Romans 8:28. And well, brother, all things work together for good. You got to kind of use a little Tennessee accent with it. But brother, all things work together for good. Things kind of becomes a 3-syllable word. All things. But we like to say that, but yet you got to read the rest of the verse. Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to His purpose. Now, years ago, there was a period of time that we call the Enlightenment, and it's a period in history where reason became preeminent. And in this time, there was a man named Descartes, and he began to doubt everything. He said, I doubt everything except for the fact that I'm doubting. And so he kind of put everything back to the thing, well, I know I exist because I can doubt and think. And so his famous phrase was cogito ergo sum in Latin, I think, therefore I am. But what he did was, and what the Enlightenment did, in order to establish certainty, they kind of removed everything else and doubted everything else. And one of the main things they doubted was the whole notion of purpose. Because Aristotle, the philosopher, basically said you can look at something and you can see causality, but he said the ultimate causality is what something is made for. What is the purpose of a thing? When you look around, you see everything has purpose. We understand that in terms of our physical life. We understand that in terms of what we put on or the things that we put into our bodies. Oh, this is for the purpose of this. We take a pill for this purpose. But do you think that that's something that we made up? No, purpose is it's the very nature of God in all that is seen. Romans chapter 1 says that the nature and attributes of God are clearly seen through what is made. And that's because there's a purpose. One of our dear friends who's a member of our church, Dr. Ming Wang, one of the most celebrated eye surgeons in the world, fantastic believer. He fascinates me when he begins to discuss the eye. And he said, if you really understood the eye and how complex it is and all the parts of that, you would never think that the eye could come about by random chance. Charles Darwin himself in The Origin of Species, he talked about the problem of the eye. Because when we begin to look at the complexity of things, the information inside of living things, everything has a purpose. So God didn't bring the universe into existence without having an overarching purpose for the universe. And so for us, we said, well, wait a minute, I don't want to get into that, Pastor Rice. I don't want to just talk about big things that college students want to talk about. I need to know how to live day by day. But yet God's purpose isn't just to bring a human race into existence or to bring physical things into existence. There is a reachable purpose that you and I can touch here and now. It's a reachable purpose. The purpose is that this planet and every living thing, every person, let's just be practical, every person on this planet would have a relationship with God. That the gospel itself, which is that that part of God's purpose which fixes that which is broken. When we were broken, when we were lost, when there was no chance to ever come back in line with the purposes of God, God himself became a man in Christ and lived the life we should have lived and died the death we should have died in our place. And then his resurrection validated who he is. And then he sends us into the planet and says, I want you to express this message to the planet. That is my purpose. And so there's no higher thing, there's no greater thing that we as a spiritual family, as a church, or as you as a family can be involved in than the purposes of God to spread this message to the planet. That's why we as a spiritual family, just starting little over 25 years ago, my college roommate, Steve Merle, and another close friend, Phil Bonasso, who you'll hear from in the next couple of weeks here as we kind of launched this series this year. But we got together in the Philippines and said, the greatest thing we can do with our lives is just see every nation reached. What if we formed an organization and dedicated ourselves to reaching every nation in our generation? That was the gist of what we were saying. And now, a little over 25 years later, we have seen churches planted in 82 nations. And by the grace of God, we hope to see that mission fulfilled by the year 2040. Now, that's not a hard, fast date. It's kind of a hope that in our generation, starting from the year 2000 to 2040, a 40-year generation, we would see ministry, especially targeting young people. Because young people are the group of the demographic that most people make a decision for Christ at an early age. And that's why the battle rages on campus and in high schools and in junior highs, even in grade schools now, for the hearts and souls and minds of people. And so Bethel is a part of this family. We're dedicated to that. We're dedicated to say, Lord, how can we touch every high school in this city? How can we touch every university in this city? How can every family, if you as a family come to church at Bethel, it's not just about you sitting here once we regather and sitting and just kind of, okay, we're in church, we've got our night, we punched the clock. No, it's about your children believing that this story is true. It's about your children saying, Lord, how can I, as a 12-year-old, understand that you do exist and that the greatest thing I can do with my life is throw myself into your purpose. And that isn't just being a pastor, that's being whoever you're called to be. That's being an educator, that's being a mom or a dad, that's being someone who works in commerce. It's wherever you find your life, realizing that I can throw myself into God's purpose and God can use me here. It's being aware of that purpose. Genesis chapter 12, God really makes the first promise, positive promise to a human being when he promised Abraham something. Now, he made a promise to Noah. Noah was told that the earth would be destroyed, and then he promised after the destruction through the flood that he would not do it again. He would not destroy the earth in that way again. But in Genesis 12, God finds this person named Abram, which meant father of many, no children. I mean, this is again the sense of humor of God. He comes to you and tells you a promise, which we'll talk about in a moment, that has really nothing to do with your ability, but he tells you what you're going to be. Abram, you've been a father of many. I'm going to call you Abraham, a father of many nations. And then he begins to give him this promise in Genesis 12, and he says, I'm going to bless you. And he says, Abraham, through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, he intended, as we go to the New Testament, as we get to the book of Galatians, it says, if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and you're heirs according to the promise, which means that it isn't just about knowing what God said to Abraham. It's saying that, wait a minute, what he promised to Abraham, he will do for me in my generation, just like he did for Abraham in his generation. Whatever God said to Abraham, he would do. And he promised Abraham, he said, Abraham, I'll not only bless you, I'll bless your descendants after you in their generation if they trust me like you're trusting me. And so as we start out the year, we're not only trusting God's purposes. God, I'm going to find out what I can do as a family to be involved in your purposes. We're trusting God's promises. Now, if we're a family focused on God, we're saying, Lord, how does what I'm doing in my life, how can my life fit into your purpose? I'm probably getting ahead of myself. Usually I'm behind myself, so I'm probably in that good conundrum right now. But I don't want to get ahead of the purpose of God, because when you understand the purpose of God is to bless the nations, then you realize that every person you see from another country in Nashville, some 100 nations living in Nashville, that is a opportunity to be a blessing to the nations without getting on a plane and flying to those nations. We were sitting in a restaurant nearby here in Brentwood, Tennessee, where we are. We're kind of Bethel's in a unique spot. We're on the corner of Old Hickory and Granny White, and then we've got the city of quote unquote Forest Hills, Nashville, and Brentwood. We're just right in the middle of all these different names. You know, we say we're in Nashville, we're technically, I think, right in Brentwood or Forest Hills. We're right in this area, but you know, you can realize that right here, right down the street, we went to eat at this restaurant, and there was a young 14-year-old, 15-year-old Egyptian student who was visiting his family and working in a restaurant right nearby here in Brentwood. And we began to befriend him. And my wife particularly took an interest in him and found out where he was, all about where he's from, and, this family members and, their names. And a few years ago, I got to go to Egypt. And when I got to Egypt, I had a problem at the airport. And I was flying from Cairo back to Tel Aviv. And that's not, you don't want to get into difficulty in the Cairo airport when you're going back to Israel. There's a lot of tension, obviously. Well, that 15-year-old student that we had befriended here, it just so happened that his father was the minister of justice in Egypt. Now, I was able to call that man. He found out that I had some difficulty. He came to the airport to help me out. Now, don't tell me I'm sitting here looking at someone who, by all appearances, is just, here he is, just some student. He could have easily been dismissed. We took an interest in him. You never know. The point is who you're going to meet and the impact that you're going to have when you befriend someone. That's why the Bible calls us to be a friend of the foreigner. The very word hospitality, we as pastors and elders are required to qualify as elders, is to be hospitable. It literally means, it's a Greek word, philios xenos, which means to be a friend of the foreigner. So we are to reach out. We're to love others from other countries. You know that there are almost 1 million international students in America. 1 million. Most of them are from the top 5% of their nation. So the best and brightest come here, and so the leaders of the nations come here to study, and what they say in surveys is almost more than the degree. They want an American friend, just somebody to befriend them. Somebody to say, would you invite me into your home? You as a family can say, how can we reach out to foreign students? How can we befriend people from other nations? How can we stop and acknowledge someone? Have you ever just been ignored? I mean, there's nothing, I would rather you just West Texas cuss me than just act like I'm invisible. And that's what many people from other countries say. They say, when we walk around here, we just feel like we're invisible. That if people perceive that we're from someplace else, they just kind of look through us. To acknowledge and to say, where are you from? And, oh, tell me about your country. In fact, we have a church in the Philippines today, one of the largest in the world, because of someone from Filipino descent who was at USC, University of Southern California, came to Christ and helped lead with Pastor Steve Murrow, lead a ministry back to the Philippines. And most of the nations we've reached, it's because we've met foreign students, international students, not only in America, One of our churches in Bangladesh is pastored by someone who came to Christ in Japan because somebody in Japan reached out to him when he was there as an international student or an international visitor. And so keeping in mind God's purposes is to touch the planet. It's to bless all the families of the nations through the seed of Abraham, which is us because of Christ. So we're a family focused on God's purpose. Secondly, as I was about to mention, we're a family focused on God's promises. And if you really believed that this book was true and you really open this up and begin to study these promises, and you begin to see, like in Romans chapter 4, when God promises the heirs of this covenant that He will bless you. He will bless you to be a blessing. You see, you and I as a family, we've got some promises. So when Pastor James stands up and he reads us the Bible week after week and he gives us these promises, we don't take those and throw them behind us. We don't kind of put them aside and go, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's pretty good preaching. No, we should have a notebook out and saying, now wait a minute, hold on a minute. What did you say God said? What did you say, Pastor James? You're saying that if you give, it'll be given back. You see, that's not just something that ministry made up for some kind of gimmick. That's out of the book of Luke. It's to give, to be blessed, to be a blessing. In fact, that was the covenant to Abraham. God says, I will bless you, Abraham, and you will be a blessing. And I promise you, when you and I get to the end of our lives, we're going to look back on our lives and we're going to say to ourselves, what did I do to make a difference? What did I do to make a difference in someone else's lives? It isn't just to say, well, at least I ate at all my favorite restaurants, and at least I watched all my favorite movies. We're not going to go down and think, well, at least the Titans won the Super Bowl. It'll happen. Just I'm not prophesying. That's a good guess. I'm just saying if we wait long enough, it's going to happen. But what are we saying? We're saying, God, did we take your promises seriously? So begin to focus on those promises. Find out what they are. People come up to us and say, well, pray for me, Brother Rice. Pray for me, Pastor James. Well, what for? Well, I don't know. Just pray. Just like we're supposed to, like we have this, we'll wave our hand over you. Well, is there any promise you're standing on? Well, none in particular. And I can't tell you the moments that I've taken my Bible and put my hand on a promise or finger like this, closed it like this, the Bible, and just walked my floor holding my Bible, holding on to a promise. Not only for a child, not only for a circumstance in my family, but sometimes in a ministry context. Lord, if you don't come through, we are sunk. Now, there's something about that. There's something about that kind of faith that we all hear, and it sounds good to be preached at about that. But when it comes down to the darkness of the midnight hour, the Apostle Paul had gotten this vision. He said, God spoke to me. I've got a vision. And he went to Silas, his ministry buddy. He said, look, I've got a vision. We're going to Macedonia. And Silas, I'm sure, is thinking, well, man, if God's in it, man, it's going to be great. They get to Macedonia, and guess what happens? They get arrested, they get beaten, and they get thrown in prison. And they're literally hanging in chains. Now, I can imagine Silas looking over at Paul, hanging in chains with their back beaten, and Silas leaning over going, vision, huh? It's not the Lord. I mean, anything that we end up getting beaten and thrown in jail could not be a vision. I mean, God, what are you talking? What kind of vision is this? You get me out here, tell me God told you to come here. This couldn't be listen, we somehow think if it's not easy, then it must not be God's will. Listen, sometimes as Paul, as the apostles in Acts said, through many sufferings we must enter the kingdom of God. But instead of sitting there bemoaning or lamenting their fate, it says at midnight, they begin to sing praises to God. At midnight, in the midnight hour, It's not just when the sun is shining and the choir's here anybody can praise God. Or you wake up one morning and there's Pastor James in your house with a pulpit like this preaching to you, or Sister Debbie singing to you. Anybody could be encouraged if Pastor James just followed you around in the choir and the music group. But what about the midnight hour when none of us are here? You better, it's not like, well, what was that verse he talked about? Have these promises written out. My brother's an attorney in Austin, Texas, Ben. And you know my story. Many of you that follow this ministry and know my brother was an atheist in law school who came home to talk me out of my faith. When I'd become a Christian, and the weekend he came home to talk me out of my faith, he said he came home to talk me out of my faith. We ended up baptizing him. And he came to Christ. It was a dramatic thing. Doesn't always happen that way. So if you're hanging on for your loved ones, don't think, well, what's wrong with us? Well, sometimes it happens fast, sometimes not. God just needed to get a hold of that man quickly. And but anyway, so all that to say is my brother is an attorney, and he takes the Bible as a legal book. And he came to Bethel years ago on a Wednesday night, and he gave a message called Lessons from the Law. And he said, read the contract. Read the contract. And my brother said one time a man came into his office and said, I got fired from my job. I've gotten fired. He said, I've been there 30 years. And my brother said, well, do you have any contract? He goes, well, something. He said, do you have any stock? He goes, yeah, I've got stock. So he brings my brother all this stock just kind of piled up. And my brother reads through it, and he looks at this man, and he said, you own 52% of the company. You own the company. You got fired from your own company. He said, well, let's just go kick him out. He said, well, wait a minute. You've been saying boss and sir to them for a while. It's going to take a minute. But because the man didn't read the contract, he didn't know that he owned the company. That actually happened. Read the contract. Don't just say, oh, I did my Bible reading today. Oh, the Holy Bible. It's so holy I wouldn't want to read it. And we put it up there like that on our coffee table, and don't put a Coca-Cola on it. We move it all around like that, and we honor. Oh, now I've got it on my phone, brother. Well, that just means it's just lost in a sea of other apps and distractions. Read the contract. Focus on His promises. And finally, so a family focused on God, this awesome God, focus on His purposes. What are His purposes? To redeem the earth. If God became a man in Christ, suffered like He did, then guess what? The gospel is the most important thing on God's mind today. Not whether my latte got made right. Not whether I have to drive around and get a parking place. And as I focus on His purposes, then it says all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to His purpose. Focus on His promises. He's made promises and He remembers them. And when we pray, it's not like we're having to remind God, God, don't you remember, you promised. No, it's not about God remembering. It's about you remembering. It's about me remembering. For some reason, God has required that we have faith. When we get to heaven, we won't need it. We'll see face to face. But now it's a matter of trust. What broke the relationship between God and man in the beginning was a lack of faith. Hath God said? Did God say? I always quote it in the King James like Satan was quoting in the King James. Hath God said? Did God say? Satan said to Adam and Eve this. And so it was a lack of faith that got us in this predicament. When God wanted to reconnect with humanity in a deeper way, He found Abram and then changed his name to Abraham. And what reconnected Abraham to God? Faith. Faith. And that's why the Apostle Paul comes along and says that righteousness is of faith. Righteousness is being in relationship, being in right standing. We come in to a right relationship with God by faith. And that's why it says without faith you and I can't please God. So we have to focus on His purposes, focus on His promises, and then finally focus on His people. You know, we've faced incredible odds as families, as individuals, as a planet not unprecedented. If we know history, we know there have been massive plagues and disasters throughout history. But for us in this generation, this has been something devastating and thousands of lives lost. But for us as a people, for us as God's people, we can't forget that He has called us to be a people, that this church is not our idea. God said, Jesus said, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You see, there's something about Jesus when he tells us things. He said something like this. He said, in fact, I'll just tell you in the way that it came to me initially. I was watching Christian television one time, and there was a man on television that I did not like what he said or what his message was. And I was kind of watching him almost like sometimes you slow down to watch a car wreck on the highway. And I remember I was criticizing this man, and I felt the Lord spoke to me, and He said, do you think he's a Christian? And I kind of chuckled. I said, well, he's a dumb Christian. And I heard this repeated back to me in my mind. He said, what you do to the least of my brethren, you've done to me. What you've done to the least. Jesus said, by this will all men know, men and women know you're my disciples if you love one another. You know, I can go out and, if I went out on the college campus and I got in front of a crowd of students and someone was sick and I prayed for them publicly and got healed, many people would think it was just a show, a trick. If we had a camera at the tomb of Jesus and could video Him coming out of the tomb 2,000 years ago, people would say, oh, that's just some kind of Photoshop, that's some kind of digital, trick there. I can give reasons for God, I can give the evidence for God, but there's something about the love that we are called to have for one another that is devastating to unbelief. Now let me make this point to you. How many Christians have you met, or people who used to be Christians, or Christians who are wandering around this city or wherever you are, and they don't go to church anymore because they said, somebody in church hurt me? Now, they're willing to broad brush 2 billion Christians on the planet because one person hurt them. They're willing to cast aspersions on the whole Christian community because of a handful of people. That doesn't make sense, but that just shows you how emotionally led we are. But let me just put it this way. If one person hurting you can devastate someone's faith, guess what one person loving can do? I marvel when I watch my buddy, my friend James Lowe and his wife and family. They live in a world that is predominantly non-African American. Their children go to a school where they're some of the, or they play in sports where they are, just a handful of African Americans in a sea of predominantly Caucasian people. And they live a message of reconciliation. And it's amazing because people come to this church. It's not because, when I was the pastor, especially wasn't because of the preaching. Now that Pastor James here, it's a little bit better. It's a little bit more of an advantage. But the reason why I believe people began to come to Bethel is because they saw this picture of a black and a white hand. And when they got here, they looked around and said, that's just not some graphic, promotional campaign that somebody thought up in the art department. It's lived out. When you come in and you see 60-something nations loving one another, in the midst of all the confusion and all the pain of this past year, when injustice and things that took place that we watched and thought, no, this couldn't be true. No one would ever do another human being like that. And yet to see the spirit of reconciliation. And it's not just something for Bethel. This is something that every believer, all of us, and if we'll focus on God's purposes, His promises, and ultimately His people. That's why He gives us a church, a practical way to love one another. Father, I thank you that in this beginning, this new year, Lord, may we not try to predict what's going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen? I'm not a prophet. Wouldn't even begin to assume I know what's to come. But I know that your purposes will not change. Economies change, governments change, circumstances change, politics change, but your purposes are unchanging. Hebrews 6:17. God wants to show, Hebrews 6:17, to the heirs of the promise, the unchangeable nature of his purpose, the unchanging nature of his purpose. Thank you for this, that you don't change, that your purposes don't change, that your promises don't change. And Lord, you give us a chance to walk this out as people. Lord, you put us practically, just like you put us in families. You give us families to practically walk out this love message, to love one another. Just as you do it naturally, you do it spiritually. Thank you for the chance to walk with my friend, Pastor James. Thank you for the chance to walk with the men and women across the planet. Thank you for the chance to love one another, not because we are from the same background or from the same ethnicity, but because we serve the same risen Jesus. And we give you praise. Amen.